All right, now we're on to speech writing part 3, and we're going to look at main points, transitioning, and conclusions. So let's get it going. So with your main points, these are the meat of your speech. So remember, in the earlier lecture, we talked about introductions and how important it is to make sure that you start off on a strong note with your speech. So after you've introduced your speech, now this is where you actually get to the main parts. This is what the key messages or the key points that you're trying to make sure that everyone is able to get what you're trying to say. So there's a couple of ways that you can order your main points. So remember from the previous lecture, remember we have intro, and then we have our main points, 1, 2, 3, and then we have our conclusion. Okay, so now that we're past intro, let's do the main points. So one way you can order your main points is spatially. And remember, one of the things that you want to do is you want your speech to flow logically. So if you're doing a speech on the tour, or like let's say you're doing your speech on, say, the mouth, okay? You want to do like an anatomy thing on, here's the anatomy of a mouth. Well, one way you can order it is spatially. So what you do is you go maybe from outside to inside. So maybe you would start with the lips, then work your way onto teeth, and on the way to your tongue. So you're working outside to in. Or let's say you're doing your speech on a building, and some famous building. Then you might start with the outside architecture, then talk about the inside structure, and then talk about the furniture. So different ways of going about a space, if you will. You can do temporal order, and temporal order is just an order of chronology. So like with the history of the toilet, when it was first invented, how has it changed since its invention, and what its future is. So past, present, future, okay? Or if you're telling a story, you'll do beginning, middle, and end. Third, you might do causal order. Causal order is where you're doing causes and effects. So you can do, if you're doing a speech on, say, like what's caused the economy to improve, your first main point might be new technologies have created jobs. So you'll do a whole point on that. And then secondly, interest rates have gone up. And then thirdly, investors are taking big risks. So you're looking at an effect, the economy is improving, and then your speech, the 3 main points are the 3 main causes: technology, interest rates, and investors. So that's a causal order. We can see the effect, and then we can go back and look at the causes. Now with comparison order, you organize speeches around similarities and differences. So if you want to compare Mac and PCs, you might first look at similarities as one main point. So here's how they're similar. Then your main point 2 might be the differences. So here are the differences between a Mac and a PC. And then number 3, like your third main point, might be implications. So here's why these similarities and differences matter. If you're somebody who's looking for a power PC, you might go with PC, then, or something like that. So either way, you still have 3 main points, and they're separated by, or they're organized by similarities, differences, and then the so what. A common one is problem, cause, solution. You'll see these in policy speeches where somebody's trying to argue for a policy of some kind. So somebody might be like, we need to pass universal health care. And there's 3 reasons why in order to see why we need to pass universal health care, we first have to see the problems right now facing our healthcare system. Then we're going to look at the causes, and the causes are, lack of too much pay. Problems might be people don't have health insurance. So a cause might be because people can't afford it. So a solution would be give everyone insurance, that kind of thing. So problem, cause, solution will give you the format you need to have 3 main points that support an idea that you're trying to propose, which is getting some kind of policy passed. But this can be true of like campus policy, anything like that. Then you have narrative. And narrative order is where you organize your speech like a story. So you have the intro, the plot, and the epilogue. So in the introduction, you give the overview of the story, then you actually give the plot, and then the epilogue is kind of like what happened after the story, or the takeaway. So that's narrative format. So you can say background, plot, takeaway, or epilogue. And then lastly, you have categorical. And these are where the main points are independent of each other. So like 3 reasons why we should recycle. And then you've reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, where maybe they're not clearly linked, but then what you want to do is you want to somehow present them in a way where it can seem like they have some kind of link from one to the other. And the best way to do that is to have transitions, okay? And you want to have transitions everywhere, but particularly when you're doing categorical order, they become even more important. But before we get to that, these are the main 7 that you can have. Now, there could be other ways as well. It just depends on what you're speaking about, what your goal is. But either way, there's some kind of logical flow. So, you have your main points. So right now, let's kind of go back to the drawing board here. You know, you have your intros, your first paragraph, and you have your main point 1, main point 2, main point 3, and your conclusion. Now, one thing you want to do is you want to make sure that in between these points, it follows. So you want to make sure that once you're done with main point 1, you've set yourself up for main point 2 conceptually. And these are called transitions. So transitions are sentences that indicate that you're moving from one part of your speech to the next. A transition will tell you that you're moving now from your intro to your first main point, and that now you're moving from your main point 1 to your main point 2, and you're moving from your main point 2 to your main point 3, and now you're on to your conclusion. That's what transitions are. They're the in-betweens here that say, okay, now I'm moving on to the next part. They indicate that you usually have completed one idea and are about to present a new one. So often a transition will summarize your previous point as you move on to the next one. So let's say I was doing a speech about wildlife sanctuaries in Central America. My first main point might have been like, you know, there's big wildlife sanctuaries in Belize. And then let's say my second main point is going to be talking about archaeological sites that you can visit. So I might say, you know, I might give my first main point about, you know, Belize. And then at the end of my main point 1, I'll say, okay, now that you've learned about wildlife sanctuaries in Belize, let's now explore Mayan archaeological sites that you can visit. Or let's say I was giving a speech on absenteeism. So this idea of, you know, people not showing up to work. So in my first main point, I might talk about the causes, right? So remember from the problem, cause, solution order that we looked at? So I might look at the causes of absenteeism in main point 1. And then what I want to do is set up the transition to get into the effects. So in between main point 1 and main point 2, I might say something like this. So now that we've learned the causes of absenteeism, now let's look at their effects. See, that little transition signal lets me know and lets your audience know that you're moving on to the next point. And now we can see when you go from causes that you're now going to be looking at effects, and we can see how the two connect. So another thing you can add then, so transitions are usually good to have because once again they add flow. So you want to make sure that the jump from paragraph 1 to paragraph 2 flows, and that's true with speaking and writing. Another thing you want to add throughout your speech is what we call signposts. And signposts are words or phrases within a sentence that help your audience understand your speech structure. So, like in summary, or to preview my main ideas, or my third point is blah blah blah, or according to blah blah blah. So, in your main points, you might say, there are 3 causes for absenteeism. First, that people don't show up to work. Number 2, people get sick a lot. And number 3, people get stressed. First, let's talk about why people don't come into work. One of the reasons that people say they don't get into work is because they're stressed out. They just become so stressed that blah, 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 blah. So you get into that point. Secondly, people also, get sick a lot. According to the CDC, people get sick every day, 3 times a week, whatever. And so all of those signposts, like, there are 3 causes of causing this. First, The first cause is blah, blah, blah. The second cause is blah, blah, blah. The third cause is blah, blah, blah. And this can be all within one paragraph, okay? But essentially what it is, it's structure. What you're doing is you're adding structure to your speech to let us know, once again, where are you on this map? So if you're letting people know that, hey, I'm on main point 1 and I'm looking at, cause number 1 within main point 2, and then cause number 2 within main point 1, and then cause number 3 within main point 1. You can say first, second, third. And then you can move on. And it's not, now that we've looked at the causes of this problem, now let's look at the effects of this problem. There's 3 effects to this problem. First, people are dying. Second, the economy sucks. And number 3, people aren't happy. So first, let's talk about people dying. So according to this study, blah, 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 blah. Okay, next, the economy stinks. So people also blah, blah, blah. And then lastly, the world just isn't a happy place. According to some people, blah, 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 blah. And that's all main 2. So now that we've seen the problems with this situation, now let's look at some solutions. So now you're at main point 3. So there are 3 possible solutions to this problem. The first solution is a personal one. We need to work harder in treating each other better. The second one is a governmental one, which is treating the government, blah, blah, blah. So you see all that structure that lets you know where you are here, where you are there. So overall, and then you can see the transition. So overall, we can see that there are problems and causes and solutions to this problem of absenteeism. We've seen that absenteeism is caused by all kinds of terrible things that are happening to people, and that the effects are devastating, billions of dollars. And we can solve this problem today, if only we just write our legislators, whatever. And then you'll end with a clincher of some kind, okay? And we'll talk about that. So you see what's going on? Like the signposting and the transitions are what tie the speech together. And they let us know where you are so people don't get lost, you see? And you want to have this especially in writing as well. So you can have more structure in writing than you can in speaking, but you definitely want to have some in speaking, especially. Okay. Now there's some other things you can add too. So you can add an internal preview. And in fact, that's what you do in your intro, is after you introduce the topic and you tie it to the topic, you give your thesis, you might preview your points. So you might say something in your intro like, so today we're going to look at the problems, causes, and solutions of absenteeism, and we're going to learn how we can fight it. Okay? So that's an internal preview. An internal preview tells you what you're going to say. And then an internal summary is a summary that comes within your paper, but not at the end in the conclusion, but somewhere in the middle, like within a paragraph or within a section that tells you what you just said. So remember, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. So the thing is, there's a trade-off to using too much structure just because the speech can then sound really stilted, but you definitely want to have it in your speech. And I'm going to be looking for signs of structure in your speech. So you got to make sure you have these things. All right. Conclusions. Last part. So, conclusions are a little bit simpler now that you've seen everything else. So, there's a couple of things you can do for your conclusion. And the first sentence should, of course, be a transition, right? You should be transitioning. And this is like your conclusion paragraph, right? Usually conclusions aren't very long. So first you should have a transition sentence that lets us know that you're concluding. Then you probably want to have some kind of summary, right? An overall summary. So you might start off with like, today we covered 3 major topics about judging competitive ice skating. First, we considered the rules. Then we considered tips for judging as if you were at home. And finally, we looked at controversy surrounding judging the Winter Olympics. So your summary is basically, here's what I told them. But then you're not done. See, a lot of people will stop here and then they think they're done, right? They just, okay, I'm done. I can end the speech now because I summarized. No, there's a third piece you need to have, and it's called a clincher. A clincher is something that leaves a lasting impression. That kind of like allows for the mic drop, if you will, or the boom, like after you speak. A lot of people leave this out, and this is why a lot of speeches end like okay, but not super well. Okay? There's a couple of ways you can clinch, okay? And one of them is tying back to the introduction. when you tie back to the introduction, what you're doing is, let's say you brought up a quote, so the Martin Luther King quote at the beginning. So your attention getter was Martin Luther King. And then you didn't talk about Martin Luther King for the rest of your speech. In the clincher part, with your conclusion, you can tie back to that quote, and you can say something like, so after you summarize your points, and as Martin Luther King once said, I have a dream, and I hope that dream comes home soon, or comes true soon. So you see how I took the I have a dream quote, and then I ended on it. So Martin Luther King has a dream, and I think he's going to find it coming true soon. Something like that. So tying back to the intro in some way. Next, you can end with like a little quote or like a little phrase. So find some kind of striking sentence or phrase. So kind of like a provocative statement, but one that does more of a closing type thing that like provides closure. So finding like a really good quote or a phrase that you can use. Some people close with a story. So you can open with a story, but you can also close with a story as well. So you can say, and to really see this, I want to tell you a quick story. Chris was somebody who called in sick to work all the time. But then when he became inspired to work harder and get over his problems, he became a very productive worker, and now he makes millions of dollars. And so all of us can make millions of dollars, if only we worked harder. I don't know. Come up with something that's like a story, and then close with it, okay? Then lastly, call to action. So ask people to do something. So like if you're doing a whole speech on like why you should go to the store, and buy a PlayStation 4, well, make that clear in the conclusion too. Like we saw why PlayStation 4s are awesome. And so when you get to the clincher, you can be like, something to the effect of, so who's ready to go to Walmart, or let's go to GameStop and let's get that console bought while it's still on sale, or something like that. Some kind of call to action that will kind of summarize everything. But the idea is that you just don't want to end here. You don't want to end just randomly. You want the ending to be purposeful, and you want it to be impactful, you see? So have some kind of clincher at the end. That's the key. Okay? So that's all of speech writing, and I look forward to seeing you write awesome speeches.